Broadcast one. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming. A bit lower and faster here. Still gaining on the lay line there.
We're looking at 10.5 to 42.
5 to 42.
Hi everyone, great to have you along for another edition of the podcast. I hope wherever you are at this increasingly crazy time, we find you healthy and managing to stay in good spirits. It's not easy, we know that, but we're thinking of you all. Before we get going, a real heartfelt thanks for all your feedback on the last podcast. Skip Novak was a popular listen, and as you heard, he's pretty unique and what a brilliant storyteller. Lots of you got in touch, keen to go sailing on Pelagic with Skip. How amazing would that be? Or with epic Skip stories, all of your own. Your interaction, is really important. So please keep it all coming. Like, review, or send me a message. It's really good to hear from you. As we mentioned in last month's pod, both Tim and I are fortunate to be in New Zealand. We're here working as part of the broadcast team for the 36th America's Cup. It's COVID-free here and really feels like we've walked through the wardrobe and into another world. Reading the global news utterly reinforces just how lucky we are to be here. And also that amongst everything else that's going on around the world, that this event can actually take place. As you know, we love exploring a good story on the podcast, really getting to know the characters of our guests. But this month, things are a little different. We're looking a little bit more like a traditional sports podcast, but there's good reason. The 36th America's Cup is already shaping up to be an incredible moment in the history of the sport. 4 of the fastest, most technologically advanced boats are currently flying around the waters of Auckland, designed by the world's smartest minds and raced head-to-head by the cream of our sport. Watching these 75-foot monohulls is something else. And I promise you, the more you know about it all, the more exciting the coverage will seem. There's so much going on. So getting up to date with what to look out for is vital. I promise you, it's going to be an epic battle to lift the oldest trophy in world sport. And the more you know, the more exciting it will be. We've already had a little taster of what's to come here in Auckland. All 4 teams have raced in the pre-Christmas warm-up. And in part 2, we'll chat to a key player from each of the challenger teams. But in this part, we're previewing the Prada Cup with 2 friends of the podcast who are no strangers to America's Cup action. As many of you know, I'm part of the commentary team here in Auckland. So who better to chat through the coming month's action than 2 of my commentary colleagues? 2 returning podcast guests, 2 accomplished America's Cup skippers, the new school foiling Supremo and Olympic gold medalist Nathan Outteridge, and slightly more old school, but equally as cool, 3 times America's Cup legend, president of North Sails, Kenny Reid. Over the next hour, we're going to chat through the teams, the boats, the designs and the tactics as we dive deep into how the Challenger Selection Series for this Cup is shaping up. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with the commentary team of the 36th America's Cup.
The America's Cup. Toys with your emotions. This is not about sailing.
When it came to the racing and getting a good result, the buck does stop at the back of the boat.
From a boat handling standpoint, you'd kind of thought we'd seen it all, and the fact is we haven't.
Well, Kenny, Nathan, great to have you both on the podcast. 2 returning guests, of course. Nathan, you were our first ever guest on the podcast, but Kenny, you were a milestone too. I talked to you for so long on your first appearance. You were our first ever double edition, a format that's stuck from then on. So welcome, both of you. It's really great to have you on board. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into what we've seen so far here in Auckland. We're going to chat a bit about the Cup itself as an event, but also about the three challengers, as the Prada Cup, the Challenger Series, is rapidly just over the horizon. But first off, Kenny, I wanted to talk to you about the Cup itself, because I remember making that programme with you several years ago, and you told us, I have to be at the Cup in some capacity. It's just a great place to be. I mean, what is it about the Cup? Why is it so important to be here for Kenny Reid?
Well, this started back when I was, well, as far as I can remember, because I grew up in, just up the bay from Newport, Rhode Island. So I'm that classic kid who was around the 12 meters all the time. And we would go out with our family, and my brother would be rooting for one boat and I'd be rooting for the other boat. And we'd put a flag up on each of our shrouds on our little 30-footer, and Gretel versus Intrepid, and, courageous. And so it was in my DNA, like it or not. That was it. And
why is it still, so important to be here?
Well, this one's special because this is the place where I got to skipper twice, and with Stars and Stripes in 2000, 2003. We had one really successful run, very unpredictable, successful run. We were by far the black sheep, barely there, shoestring budget. That was the one we did great in, and a step away, just really one race away from making it into the Challenger finals. And then 2003, which was kind of a shame. That was the one where we did have better funding and just couldn't put it all together for some reason or another. And 95 was interesting. That was my first Cup as part of a team, and that was also quite kind of up and down. Listen, it toys with your emotions. This is not about sailing necessarily. A lot of times, the America's Cup. It's about life and the politics and the physicality and the mental aspect of it. And it's always tugging at all these extremes all the time. And yeah, it makes you a better person. At the end of the day, win or lose, I think it makes you a better person.
Your full-time job is president of North Sails. And of course, you're involved in the design and build of three of the team's sails, including, those main sails, those double-skinned mains that AC75s are using. But what about Kenny Reid, the sailor? Kenny, what are you thinking when you're watching these boats flying around the bay here? Is there a part of you that wishes you were still involved, wearing your wet weather gear, getting to grips with foiling jibes?
Yeah, I think so. But the realist is that, it's athletes now to a level, that even during my Cup time, the athleticism was put as big a people as you can on grinders and as skilled people as you can on with a rope in their hand, and then a very different kind of faction of people in the back of the boat. This is different. This is pure athleticism if you look at it that way. So do I? Yeah, maybe a very small part of me would like to be out there, but then, you just look at what these guys are going through, to get to the point of where they are. I just don't know if I have that in me right now. Frankly, that's a commitment, serious commitment.
I always look at it and think, there's no way I'd be able to make decisions that quickly.
Right. Well, on a boat, but even it's the decisions like any campaign. It's the decisions off the boat that are the big ones. On the boat is actually kind of the fun, easy part if you think about it. It's the decisions off the boat, which we're seeing firsthand. Those are the ones that are the critical ones. The regatta's won a year before it starts mentality. The America's Cup is the America's Cup.
We'll get your thoughts on all of that shortly, Nathan. But let's get into the teams themselves. 3 challengers for the Cup here in Auckland. And we'll start with the challenger of record. And first up, I want to ask, with a new class, as we have with the AC75, do we think there's an advantage being the challenger of record?
I think there's an advantage, because they were involved in the rule. Them and Team New Zealand were involved in creating this rule, and I think we saw with the first boats that they came out with, they actually haven't changed from their first to their second boat too much. So I guess they were kind of a step ahead of all the other challengers because they had an understanding of, the rule and how it's going to play out and all the pros and cons, and more time doing various different simulations. So, their second boat to their first boat's just been sort of a refinement as opposed to, a big change for the other two challenges. So I think for sure they started with a head start, and it might be slowly being pegged back now.
Do you think we're seeing that, Kenny?
Oh, no question about it. Listen, the other two challengers at times have been reasonably vocal about the fact that they were always felt a step behind when it came to, the development of the boat. And you can see where both the challenger of record and the defender appear to have been that one kind of design iteration ahead at the beginning. Now, the whole game is, can you catch up? That's what we're all here to find out.
They look great out on the race course, don't they? I mean, Luna Rossa, can we sum up how they looked throughout those pre-Christmas races?
Luna Rossa?
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep saying, I think Luna Rossa is the stealth group of all of them right now. I think they're hiding the most. I think they got the most stuff still sitting on the bench back in the shop. I think they've done a really interesting, they've done a great job of refinement of what they have right now. And by the way, as I find out, as I switch over towards the media side in this particular case, there's no fact to anything I'm saying right now. I just think they have stuff sitting there that they're really comfortable and confident in. They look confident. I just feel like they have stuff sitting there waiting to go, and they didn't show it all. They're trying interesting, different stuff like the no running backstays and, trying to control. So I think they're in the process of trying things, but I also think they're in the process of showing things that they want to show. And I don't know, again, I may be way off base here, but I just feel like they got a lot to go. They just look and feel confident to me for some reason. I don't know.
It's part of it, isn't it? I mean, for us as well, it's part of the enjoyment, the intrigue, the secrecy, actually just kind of discovering, what it's all going to be about. I mean, Nathan, let's talk foils. You've taken a lot of interest in the different foils out there, and it's my understanding that we may not yet have seen all the foils that Luna Rossa have in their armoury. But from what we saw, what's their setup like?
Yeah, well, the foils we saw them use for the racing prior to Christmas were quite big foils. If you actually looked at the area of all the foils, they were on the bigger side. And we saw them being quite competitive in the lighter wind ranges, that really close race with Team New Zealand. And, all the research we've been able to do tells us they've got one set that they've made before that, which we haven't seen them race with here. And so we're pretty confident there's another set coming. And the question really is are they going to continue down this path of larger area optimizing for the lighter winds, or are they going to bring out a foil that's much more similar to what Team New Zealand had that, sort of gets you through the range a bit more? Right now, that decision would have been made months ago. It wasn't made based off the racing at Christmas because they'd be getting them after the event's over. So I don't know. I think, their foils look nice and they're performing well, but I think once it gets to 14 knots, they just don't have the same speed as, American Magic and Team New Zealand. It's kind of their crossover, and you can't, like what we had in Bermuda, have a light wind and a strong wind foil. You need something to get you through the range. So I suspect the next set of foils we see will be maybe just a little smaller and maybe has that bulb on it that the other teams have as well.
The foil game has been tricky, isn't it? I mean, you could only build 6 individual foils, and obviously the lead time to build them is really long. So if whether you build a set or you try independent foils, or when you show them, as you say, Kenny, it's a kind of game all by itself.
Oh, it's good fun. That's the fun game, the speculation game, and again, they've made these decisions a long time ago. Even compared to sales, you can have a sale here in 2.5 weeks if you really need it. these foils are what, 6 months?
Yeah, I heard, like 12, 14 weeks. But then it's the installation of the foil by the time you hook up the control system, because it's not as simple as what we have with the L boards for the AC50s, where you literally just put them in the
Plug
dagger
and
board
play.
case
Yeah.
and away you go. Because all the control system on the catamarans was moving the dagger board case, whereas this is actually control systems through the foil itself and out to the flaps. And yeah, so I think building it's just one small part of the design. It's how do you then actually operate it?
Interestingly, it's an Italian boat. The crew are all Italian, with the exception of Jimmy Spiddle, of course. But a real feature of the coverage here in Auckland has been the audio of the boats. I mean, we've been absolutely loving it. And we can hear the team on Luna Rossa all talking English, clear, concise chat between Jimmy and Francesco Bruni, the only team running 2 helmsmen. Kenny, how do we think that's working out?
So far, so good. We were all very skeptical, as you would be. I've talked to a few kind of Cup historians as to whether anything like this has ever been done before, and I think the answer is pretty vehemently no. So this is it's pretty rare. You say, well, we're seeing a first in the type of boat, let's put it that way. But from a boat handling standpoint, you'd kind of thought we'd seen it all, and fact is we haven't. So this is a new concept, and under pressure, they've shown to be good, maybe very good. I think the pre-starts are still where you're going to see it. On the race course, I think you pointed out, they seem to be better in their tight split-second maneuvers because they don't have people running all over the boat. So, yeah, that's yet to be seen. But yeah, I don't think this has ever been done before. And the fact is, I think they would have liked to have had a Italian-speaking boat just for the aura of Luna Rossa and Prada. But Spiddle's he's no slouch. They couldn't get Nathan because he was busy that day. So they got Jimmy.
Didn't have the money.
Yeah, didn't have the cash.
Obviously.
Yeah, how's your Italian, by the way?
I'm an Australian as well, so it's not very good. So that wouldn't have tipped it over the line.
I spoke to Jimmy about it when they first started it, and he said, yeah, it's great. I'm always right, because he's on the starboard side, isn't he? I mean, Nathan, you've helmed fast, agile boats like these. How can you see that working? Is that something that you could deal with?
Well, I think it's a really interesting way to take it. Like the boats, it's not just one person's driving it. Like the relationship between the person driving, the person flying, and the person trimming the sails is super critical. And so like when you're on the windward side and you're driving like Jimmy is on starboard tack, everything he does with the wheel, to turn up or down or go faster mode or higher mode, he has to work with Bruni, who flies the boat, and he changes the flap and the rudder to accommodate that. And the same with the mainsail trimmer. So everything that he feels when he's driving, you tack it over, he can then deliver to Bruni. So that their ability to learn actually is better than the other teams. And I remember when we would sail smaller boats like 49ers, I'd do a lot of crewing and Goobs would do a lot of driving to learn each other's role. And then we got to the 50s in Bermuda and we had Paul Goodison, Bruni, Goobs and myself all sharing those jobs between our 2 test boats. So having another person who does the same number of hours driving as you actually gives you the chance to develop. It doesn't end up being we're going down the Jimmy Spiddle path or the Francesco Bruni path. It's a decision that they make together, and I think it actually probably brings the team tighter together. So I think there's a lot of advantages to it, and the only reason why it works in a boat like this is that having someone on the leeward side is not as big of a compromise as, say, what it was on a catamaran that's really wide. So you don't lose the straight line performance by having someone down there because you need someone there anyway to fly the boat because you can't see it from the windward side. And so then you get all these gains in the maneuvers because no one's crossing, so you're straight away at speed. So it's just how they share the jobs out, and when the roles get handed over, there would have been a lot of thought, and Philippe Presti's there making sure that they sort of agree on some terms of operation, and I'm sure that they'd be sticking to it.
I wonder that. I mean, we saw in the pre-Christmas racing actually a fair amount of match racing, and I wonder if in that kind of decision making that it could unravel.
Well, the one disadvantage they have is that because you've got someone driving and someone flying, the moment you switch tacks, the jobs switch straight away. You don't have, say, that tactician or that one person driving that can kind of go from this position to that position and understand the full picture. They actually have to communicate it across. And if you hand over the reins to your partner and say, you take it from here, they might not follow through on the plan that you'd set up for them. So I think it's just going to take strong communication and trust in your teammates. It definitely has a potential to go wrong, but I think
no question. I think the tactical side is the side that is scary because, we saw some tight boat racing out here, tack on each other. We haven't seen that in a long time. A little bit every once in a while with the catamarans, maybe in Bermuda, but that's a tactician focusing on what the other person's doing, watching for that person to run around or watching for the board to splash down, knowing that the tack is coming. That having a dedicated tactician or somebody at least attempting to be a dedicated tactician, I don't know. That's the part that worries me for them a little bit.
Nathan, you've helmed a couple of times at the Cup now, both times for Swedish team Artemis Racing. And listeners, if you haven't caught up with Nathan in the first edition of the podcast, give it a listen. I love the story of when you finally decided to go with Artemis and you walked into the shed to realise they hadn't built any foils for the race Ep17. But Nathan, Artemis were a privately funded campaign backed by Torbjörn Tornquist, of course. How much pressure do you feel as principal team member to perform after all that investment? I mean, how much pressure, is the environment of the Cup?
There is a lot of pressure. I think people can say, the pressure's not really there when you're a part of America's Cup team. And whether you're funded by one individual or a collective group of people, the pressure's still there. And at the end of the day, you just want to do the best you can on the water. I think the thing that kind of, I guess, eased a bit of the pressure for me was that, Torbjörn he loved sailing. And, I'd sail with him on the RC44s. He understood sailing and he understood that there's only so much you can do on the water with the equipment you have, and there's a lot of design in the background, and Ian Percy did a great job of keeping Torbjörn really up to date with where we're at and our expectations and how the boat was performing. And Torbjörn spent the whole time with us in Bermuda during the racing, and it wasn't so much like I'm funding the team, all the pressure, you go make it work. It was more than that for him. It was an emotional thing too. He really sort of lived the team, and we'd take him sailing on the boat, and it was really special. I don't know how many people will get to experience relationships like that. But without a doubt, when it came to the racing and getting a good result, the buck does stop at the back of the boat. And so, we were obviously really happy with our results throughout Bermuda, but that racing against New Zealand, when you had a boat that was going a bit quicker than you, and you'd finish the day and you'd take a win off them, but you'd lose a couple and you'd sit in the debrief and Torbjörn would be there with us, and he's like, I see it too. So long as you keep winning the starts and doing everything you can, that's the best you can do. And he said, we've just got to try and find some more speed every day, and I guess we ran out of time. So for me, there was a lot of pressure, but it was shared among a group of people. And I think, Torbjörn felt the pressure as well himself, to help wherever he can get the result.
Well, talking of pressure, let's move on now to our second team. And of all the teams here right now, I'm guessing there's one man really feeling pressure, and that's British helm Sir Ben Ainslie. Kenny, how did Ineos Team UK come out of the pre-Christmas racing?
About as bad as you can get. I mean, I can't. There's been just a few times in history. Again, I feel like the old historian here. That a team maybe has been more disappointing to its fan base. I think that's the That's one side of it. Again, this is all about decisions made a long time ago, and I think they're really smart over there. So, and B, because they're really smart, they might have tripped over a couple things that they were doing wrong quite a while ago, and either didn't have some changes in place for this event, or were always planning on after the event. Like, I think you and I spoke about the fact that they just needed to get through that weekend, knowing that the cavalry is on its way. So, it was a tough weekend for them. I can't even fathom how tough. I went back through my sailing history. I don't know if I've had a sailing weekend as tough as that, but I give them lots of credit for chin up type of mentality. And I know for a fact they got some stuff coming, and whether it's the engine above the deck or the engine below the deck, they have help on the way to make them a lot more competitive, because they need not a little more competitive right now. They need a lot more competitive.
Well, there is a bit of time, but not a massive amount. Nathan, in a situation like that, the clock is really ticking. How much can the team realistically do to try and come out with a real competitive edge?
Yeah, well, they've got about 3 weeks from their last race to the first race coming up in January. And, as Ken said, you could design and build a new set of sails in that period of time. And I'm sure that they had new quivers of sails coming that probably were going to, help some of the problems they're facing. Doing much to that hull is really hard, but you can do a lot with your control systems. We saw them have control system issues at the beginning of the week, and maybe they were just a temporary fix. And so maybe there is more speed to come from that. With their foils, you can modify these foils, but again, lead times are quite hard. So I'd like to think that they've been able to identify the issues with those foils. It seems like they're struggling for takeoff. So bottom end speeds are not good with the foils they race with. So, maybe they're modifying an earlier set of foils to help that, or maybe they're modifying the current set of foils. But every big modification you do like that takes the boat off the water. And so if it's about refining what they have, they can't sail. So it's sort of like, do we fix the boat and not sail, or do we try and work around the stuff we have? And I think the bottom line is that they just don't have good performance below, say, 12 knots. Their boat speed when it was windier, like on that first day, was quite good. They just didn't have a control system working for them. And in the lighter days, Ben was very clear. He said, we can't take off the foils, the sails. There's fundamental problems here. And I don't see them fixing those fundamental problems. And if they try to improve their light wind performance, they're probably going to take away maybe what is a fast boat when it's windier. So, I would love to have been in that design meeting after the racing or during the racing saying, right, okay, well, what do we do? Do we sacrifice everything below 12 and cross our fingers for a breezy January, and that might get us through one of the rounds? Or do we try and improve in the light end knowing it's going to sacrifice us somewhere else? That's the discussion every team's having, but they're having it the most because they know they've got a big problem probably under 14 knots. They've got a really big problem.
Do you think they knew that beforehand? I mean, there's so much data, haven't they, coming off the boat, and every team is, a team of recon, looking at all the other teams. I mean, do you think it was a surprise?
No, not even a little bit. I think they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into that weekend. They went down a couple paths. You mentioned earlier, and I kind of missed the answer, the twin skin mainsails, for example. I for sure, some of these teams have gone to far greater lengths of ultimate control of the windward side and the leeward side of the mainsail setup, and how those controls kind of auto work in the middle of maneuvers. I think they have a ways to go on the control of the depth, because we keep equating it to, airplane taking off, lengthening and fattening its wing. So, and then it takes off, and very quickly the wing gets smaller and it gets skinnier. The front end gets much narrower. it's exactly the same concept. They need a fat wing to take off, and then they very quickly need to make that wing, perform from 10 knots of apparent wind to 60 knots of apparent wind. That's not exaggerated. That's actually the real numbers. So I think some teams have really worked on that harder than others, and they may be, I think they've had those steps hopefully available to them. Because they went out sailing, I think 2 days after the regatta ended. I personally think that's a good sign, because that means they did have stuff that they needed to go out and try right away. So I take that as a good sign.
All right, let's take a minute to look at the positives, though. And one of them has to be the team itself. I mean, there's a lot of talented sailors on that boat. I mean, it would be great to see them able to really engage with confidence out on the race course. And let's not forget, day 3 of racing here, they clocked the fastest straight line speed.
Oh, there's no doubt the sailing team is really talented. The likes of Ben Ainsley, Giles Scott, you can go through that whole list. They've got a lot of experience on that boat from America's Cup sailing. And, when it comes to combat racing, we know that Ben's going to do really well in the starting. We saw that in a few starts against Team New Zealand. He able, with confidence, once they could control the boat, to bully the other boat around. And at those tight manoeuvres in the pre-start, they were nailing them just fine. So I think if they get a boat that is comparable in speed, they're at least going to be holding their own at the starts and tactically around the course. I could hear, watching some of the racing back, the conversations between Ben and Giles were quite good in terms of their tactical plays. So all they really need is a bit of boat speed, and they'll be tactically sailing just fine.
Just in case the Americans pull this back, let's do a piece to camera.
There's the All Blacks. And then Team New Zealand is the next favourite team.
This upwind starting sequence is real. This is real match racing. Hey, before we go further, you're the one always asking the questions in the podcast. Well, it's your podcast. Can we name it our podcast for a minute and ask you a couple questions? Is that fair? It won't be personal, although I have to admit that when you did a podcast with me, the first thing you did was put a huge beer in front of me, and it got personal very fast. So
that's why it was so long, Kenny.
There's no alcohol. There's no attempt to liquor up.
Okay, you're making me nervous.
No. You asked us questions about our first dealings with the America's Cup. What is Shirley Robertson's first dealings with the America's Cup?
Well, I've never sailed like you guys in the America's Cup. But I mean, the first time, I guess, the story and the intrigue really grabbed me was the Deed of Gift match in 10. It'd been in the courts, hadn't it, for years and years and years. And then finally, these 2 giant boats arrive early spring in Valencia. Larry Ellison against Ernesto Bertarelli. Ernesto steering his own boat. I mean, nobody knew. I mean, here we didn't have much idea, did we? But there, we had no idea what was going to happen. And, Russell had been pretty ballsy. They built a wing right in the beginning of wing technology. And it was so sort of cumbersome, they couldn't take it out at night. So in the evening, a team of sailors would arrive and they'd just manage this sort of bucking boat in the harbour, in the shipyard there in Valencia. I mean, it was so exciting. And I remember that first morning we were out in a rib. It was still dark, I guess, because it's, still winter. And both boats came out, and there they were, these massive, massive machines. And off they went to duke it out. I mean, it was so intriguing. And then just kind of watching the Alinghi campaign kind of fall apart, and Ernesto leading that, being in the press conference himself, and I mean, what that's like, Nathan. I mean, basically just sort of taking it all on. It was so full of story and passion and money, and I mean, it was like the ultimate soap opera. So for me, I guess that really hooked me in as a storyteller. I love that cup.
Just prior to that, you were essentially coming out of your heyday, especially in the match racing part of the world. Was there ever an opportunity for you? And did you feel like you might have earned at least a whiff at it? As you're talking, that's all I can think of is, Wait a second. Why didn't her story start one section prior?
Yes, I think that's a whole other podcast. But the only women that have been in the Cup have been in a women's team, in Bill Koch's team back in, help me out here, the historian.
Don't forget Dawn Riley.
Yeah, and Dawn Riley.
Had her own program.
Yeah. So in an era, I guess, where there was a lot more teams.
Did you move on to San Francisco as well? You were in San Francisco as well, right?
Yes, I mean, as a storyteller, it just doesn't get any better. We were there with CNN, and we arrived. We'd done quite a lot of filming in the build-up, but I remember we arrived, and our first day on the water was the first day of the match, and we were out in a rib, and I can shut my eyes now and remember it. These two giant boats coming together, just in this amazing amphitheater of San Francisco with the bridge, and it was windy, and it was unbelievable. I mean, it's such a moment in our sport, but it went on for such a long time that we're in the end, we're like, what? We're there for CNN. We've got a set number of days. We're like, what are we gonna do? And in the end, we're like, we're just going to have to go home. Let's just in case the Americans pull this back, let's do a piece to camera, which kind of covers our ass. And I remember the last day that we filmed, they went, it would have been 8-2, so they won a race. And as they crossed the finish line, right off the village, I did a piece to camera kind of saying, what a turnaround for Oracle Team USA.
Oh my God, you're giving up your secrets.
And we thought we're never going to have to use that. And and we did. I mean,
did you leave?
We had. You can't just stay. It's television. It's not an unlimited budget, Nathan.
I left as well. I had to go to another event. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll book a flight, go to the 49er Worlds. That's going to happen. The Cup will be over by then, and I'm up every night watching the race and listening to this guy talking.
I didn't leave
about
because Todd Harris told me, quit your TV job immediately because it's never going to be any better than this in your sport, so bail right now. Never go on television again and commentate. And of course, I didn't listen to him.
And I can't go to a press conference now without thinking of Jimmy Spittle. I mean, back against the wall. Do you remember what he said in that press conference? He's like, imagine if they lost it from here. I mean, so
But
punchy.
do you really think that had any... I think that is one of the most exaggerated moments in sailing history, frankly. Do you think that really got into Dean's head?
Well, it was good telly.
I don't think it got into Dean's head, but could you imagine sitting there with everyone looking at you and Kenny going, we're a long way behind, but, I'm just going to put it out there. Imagine if they lose. And then just smile at the camera and think,
okay, that's
write
fair.
something about that.
That's fair. He may have shifted the media's attention for a few moments. Yeah, maybe that's what it... But I don't think he got in Dean's head. I think a faster boat got up against Dean. Nothing got into Dean's head.
Jimmy Spittle, he smashes the press conference, doesn't he? I mean, love it when he turns up. Anyway, there we see why I'm not interviewed on my own podcast. Too much to talk about. But that, talking about San Francisco, does lead us nicely onto our third challenger, doesn't it? Dean Barker, sailing here for the Americans, but sailing in his hometown against his old team. I mean, that can't be easy, can it?
No, I'm sure that's not easy for him. He was a part of Team New Zealand when they defended the Cup here. Was that back in 2000? And then went through, obviously, the really tough loss of 2003 and was with the team, building it all back all the way up to San Francisco. So to come with a new team and try and challenge is not just difficult because winning, obviously racing and trying to win the America's Cup is difficult in itself, but to do it on your home waters after, trying to always win it for your country and now you're trying to take it back to America, must be quite conflicting for him, I'm sure.
Do you think this is a bigger deal for Kiwis than it is for us as non-Kiwis? Like, I noticed that Stephen McIver, who we're working with in the booth, has mentioned that a bunch of times, that Dean Barker in his own hometown, up against...
It's a big thing for Kiwis.
Yeah.
Kiwis...
I think it is too, and I underplayed it, but I think it is too.
I've lived here now for about 2 years, and the America's Cup is the second biggest sport in all of New Zealand. You know, there's the rugby, the All Blacks, and then Team New Zealand is the next favourite team. And they don't compete very often, but whenever they do something, they're being watched. Like I'll go for a walk on the foreshore and you see Team New Zealand sail past and everyone's like, wow, look at that boat. You know, how cool is that? And I'm like, in Australia, no one would even notice. You know, here everyone has an opinion about those people, and the sailors, the designers, every person in a cafe has an opinion about the team. So yeah, I think, you know, back to Dean, I think it does make it a tough challenge to go against the taxpayers' team.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a real legacy of it all as well. I mean, the Kiwi public were burnt, in essence, when, you know, when Russell Coates and Brad Butterworth, you know, came and, I mean, as they'd see it, you know, took the cup away from them with a lingy. So there's all of that. And then I guess, you know, the incredible loss in San Francisco. I mean, we came to New Zealand that winter after they'd lost in San Francisco to film, you know, a program about losing. And, you know, Grant Dalton was really generous. He let us in, but it was so raw, you know, his emotion, you know, his sense of loss. And I remember filming Dean at his family home with his, you know, his child sitting on his lap. You got a real sense of what it meant. And I think you're right. You know, the Kiwi public feel that they understand it and they own it in a way. And
we could do just a podcast about this subject, by the way.
Dean Barker. Hopefully he'll come on. I mean, let's just talk about the boat and the team for a little while. What did we learn about American Magic in those December races?
Well, I think they were pretty sharp. Like they clearly showed they've done the most sailing out of all the teams. You know, I think their starting entries, their starting execution was pretty slick. They, you know, weren't making any unforced errors. We saw a couple of mechanical issues with the foil cant system for them. But in general, they were sailing really well, and particularly when it was windy, they looked fast. You know, they were the only team to beat Team New Zealand in that breezy race, and they look like they've got good speed when it's windy.
What do we know about their foil setup, Nathan? I mean, how are they looking foil-wise?
Well, from what we understand, the foils they used were their third set that they built. So the first two iterations, this has just been a refinement as they've gone through. So they're pretty small. I think they're the smallest out of all the teams in terms of area. Hence why I think they're good when it's breezy. But it also looks like they have really good control over them. You know, they're maneuvering quite nicely in the light winds as well, which I think came as a surprise to a lot of people. You know, I've been watching them sail here a lot over the last few months, and you could always see when it was light they were sticky. But we didn't see that at all in any of the racing. So I guess they realised that the foil size is the size they've got. They've got enough flap range to get enough lift, and they probably focused a lot on trying to get the power out of the sails to get it up and going. And they look pretty nice to me.
The only team without north sails, Kenny. I won't ask you to talk.
No, that's okay. Well, it's hard to compete against when one of the principal funders of the program owns his own sailmaking company. We always declared within our organization, whoever can sell them sails from north would get Salesman of the Year for sure. And unfortunately, we didn't quite get it.
You've got a few more years to go.
Well, I got a couple weeks. I told them, do not count me out.
What's the prize? I mean,
a job next year. Yeah.
Tough boss.
All right. And again, you know, an experienced team, right? I mean, as discussed, Dean Barker, I mean, so much experience there. Paul Goodison, Terry Hutchinson, of course. And he's surrounded himself with his guys, hasn't he? I mean, what do we make of the team there?
Well, even Dean is one of Terry's guys. This is Terry's program, no question. He's been very successful in some of his bigger boat programs. He has not had the success in the America's Cup that I know deep down internally he wants. You know, we're all ego driven, and Terry's no different. But Dean's his guy too. They came very close to winning the cup in similar roles, helmsman tactician role in 2007. So I think a lot of it for Terry is the comfort zone of being off the water with the person too. How are we going to evolve this program along? not just the specific talents. Just the specific talent on the water is a small part of a great America's Cup sailor. You have to be equally as good off the water with ideas and then coming through on ideas when it's your turn. That's hugely important.
I mean, it feels like there's a good vibe there, and perhaps our listeners don't really realize that. I mean, so much of the team has come from the Quantum TP52 campaign or Bellamente, both of which, Terry is very instrumental in. I mean,
and those are the two principles. That's DeVos and Hapfouth. So that's very astute, and it's nothing that's surprising because Terry essentially helped put both of those programs together. My only worry with their team is you can talk about daily improvements. That's kind of the mantra around here. You have to get faster every day. And in these new development boats, especially the brand new development boat in San Francisco, they were going knots faster every day, right, for a while there. So unlike the beginning of our conversation about the Prada Pirelli folks, have they left enough, off the plate so far to be able to take it on the boat and to improve speed? So again, like we speculate, if they're on their third set of foils, what's next? Where's that next big jump going to be? So that's going to be the interesting part. You can't just talk about it. You got to do it.
Do you think we might have seen the best of them?
No, I just think they're so good, right? They were really good. I think it was a sigh of relief for that team because they do have, your original question of Torbjörn, they have, including the New York Yacht Club, four very strong personalities. Roger Penske is his own podcast. He talk about success in a sport. I mean, he may be the most successful motorsport owner in history. He sells more cars in the United States through all of his dealerships than any other person. That's success. That's big. And so have somebody on that team. I hope they're utilizing that person. I hope they're utilizing his experience and his success, because you got to take that as an asset rather than a fear it. You can't fear, like we were talking about, the owner. You have to bring the owner in and have them as part of the solution. So I hope they're doing that. Yeah,
the closer they are to the team, the more they get involved in the decision making, the more you can actually use them. They're very intelligent people, to
Clearly.
Get where they are. So if you could use some of their knowledge and drop it into the team, your team's only going to be stronger for it.
Kenny, they are representing the New York Yacht Club, the original holders, of course. How big a deal would it be for New York to win back the cup?
You can't fathom how big a deal, but there are some people within the club that think it's as much a curse as it is, an honor to have, because it's a lot of work. As Grant Dalton can tell you right now, I can't fathom the amount of work putting this on. But the region, around Newport where I live, a lot of people talk about it. I just hope, don't get too caught up in it. If I'm speaking to the New York Yacht Club right now, there's a long way to go. I'm personally very superstitious. And when you talk about a victory before you've even started your competition, as if, when we win it, we are going to do X, that makes me very fearful. I think that is the biggest jinx you can put on something. But don't, listen, New York Yacht Club is very close to, if not an exact 25% partner in this. So the New York Yacht Club is very influential. Past Commodore Phil Lotz is here. He's been with the team. Very smart, very successful, staying on his 60-foot catamaran out here. And he's a big part of it, as are all of the principals. And they're committed. I'm very pleasantly surprised to see how committed the New York Yacht Club is to this.
All right, so on the spot, so that's the three challengers. Nathan, Kenny, who's taken out the Prada Cup?
It's a big question. I think it'll be between the Americans and the Italians, and I'm on the side with Kenny that says that the Italians have more in their tank than the Americans do. And so I think, they'd be the favourites for me, particularly if it's in the lighter wind ranges, which is what usually happens as we go through February, March. So I'm going to go with the Italians.
So I think this is a setup question to get us fired. Can you admit if it is or not? Because I remember all the football back home, our American football, when they're asked this on like the Sunday morning show, like they'll have the color commentator on the pregame show, and then they'll go around the room and who's your prediction? And then they come to that person, and that person has to say, no, I can't say anything because I'm calling the game. So I think this is a setup right now.
You're saying I just got fired?
Yeah, you're out.
All right.
Anyway, listen, Nathan
That'll
said,
make my wife really happy.
Nathan said exactly what I would have said. Listen, if the Brits can come back from their predicament, talk about an 8-1, that makes the 8-1 look even further in the rearview mirror. That would be spectacular. Don't get me wrong, but they got a bloody steep hill to climb. I think we're going to have some really good sailing. These other two programs are quite sorted. And I think, again, they both felt confident after that weekend that they were in the game. So we're going to have some good sailing there.
I know we've been previewing the Prada Cup, but we can't go without talking about the defenders, our hosts here in Auckland, Emirates Team New Zealand. What have we learned about the defenders throughout the December racing?
Well, they look fast. I think they've spent probably their time fully focused on making a boat as fast as it can be, and that's through a full wide wind range, the sail control, the aerodynamics of the boat, the foils. They've still got another set of foils to come too. But I don't think they've spent much time focused on racing. It wasn't very impressive there. Starting, you can see when they're going around marks and stuff, a few wobbles here and there. So either the boat's really difficult to sail, and we know it's probably the only boat that doesn't have any windows in the sail, so they can't see it all to leeward. So I think, they've just said, let's make it as fast as we can and we'll just deal with the racing. And I think we saw 4 days of racing that they definitely needed. And so now it's about optimise the boat, get better at racing for March. But they're looking very strong.
They seem pretty confident. I watched an interview Grant Dalton did on national television here, where he said he feels like they're entering a dynasty era. How hard do you think they're going to be to beat?
Again, that falls under the same comment I made a second ago. Don't go promising. Under promise and over deliver, Grant. That's my only suggestion. It's hard. Again, I'm the old historian now, right? So I'm going to go back. Historically, teams who are defending for the first time in a new boat typically win. And it's going to be because they have the advantages that we talked about earlier of developing the rule, developing the twin skin mainsail, understanding the concepts before the concepts are even given to other teams. That's a big one. That's a big advantage. They feel fast, but we've speculated, the three of us on air, several times, how are they going to practice? There's no second boat. The good old days of bring your other boat out and go and beat each other up for a little bit of time, doesn't exist. So is it on moths? Is it on other foiling boats that you can practice these pre-start maneuvers? I think they can get around the corners better, like Nathan said, on their own, just practicing on their own. But this upwind starting sequence is real. This is real match racing, or has potential at real match racing. Stuffing somebody, splashing them in the water and go. I mean, they're all foaming at the mouth to pull that off. Not just to win a race, but then you puff your chest up and off you go. So it's they got some work to do there, no question. But your buddy Pete and Blair and the rest of those guys, they don't seem to be fazed by much. So I'm guessing they got a plan.
Yeah, I'm sure they've got a plan. At the end of the day, that was probably Pete's first real sort of upwind match race starting, and don't just talk about the sailors in the team. Think about the coaching staff they've got, that are going to help them. Ray Davies has got a wealth of experience in, the traditional match racing starts, and Hamish Wilcox, who coaches them also in the 49er. They would have made a lot of notes and said, we've got a bit of work to do here. And I think that, as we saw in Bermuda, not much phases Peter Burling. If he makes a mistake, he just laughs about it and goes, oh, I'll just try not to do that again, and I'll just go fast. That's his attitude to everything, is I'll just go fast, and, I'll win by being fast. And he's an engineer, so he'll be in there all the whole time just working on the team, make the boat faster so we can make mistakes. It's a sailor's dream, isn't it, to have a faster boat so you don't have to,
Tactician's best
stressful.
friend.
Yeah.
Boat speed. So that's our preview to the Prada Cup, gentlemen. I mean, any other business, anything I've missed at all? What does our listeners need to know that we haven't covered?
As Stephen says, what's it like to be the eyes on the water? It's back to being our podcast for a second. The best eyes on the water, as you keep saying, and throwing it out to you. It feels like you're going 100 miles an hour all the time. And can you just describe your position in that camera boat? Are you strapped down? Just give us a little bit of idea. We need a photo. We don't have any idea. We don't have any idea. Never mind your beloved listeners.
Yeah, well, for the benefit of our listeners, I have this seat in the house. I couldn't be closer to it unless I was actually, on the AC75. I sit front seat beside the driver on the filming catamaran, and we have a giant camera, a big camera called a shot over that's gimbaled, and it's out the front of the catamaran, and I sit there in a chair that's full of suspension and hanging on. I mean, we feel when the AC75 turns a corner, so do we. And so I'm hanging on with one hand, microphone in the other. I mean, it's a really, it hasn't passed me by. It's a really privileged spot, right in the thick of the action. The only boats on the course are us and the poor umpire who's trying to keep up.
Beaten up, yeah.
So yeah, it's an amazing spot.
So what's your top speed on your catamaran?
We're not fast enough. It is it's slightly nerdy here, but the platform is a converted AC45, but we're a bit short in terms of...
Which is what? 30, 40?
We're nearly 40, just short of 40.
And you're not fast enough?
Sometimes not. Yeah.
So that's all anybody
But at
needs
least
to
you
know.
can cut the corners, right? Because you could
true.
just
You don't have
cut
to go
the
on the marks.
corners and go up the boundary if you need to, and that's how you keep up with the boats. But it wasn't windy in the racing you were watching either so far. So.
I've got it all to look forward to, Nathan. Yeah. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Many thanks again for coming back on the podcast. It's been a really great chat. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shirley. It's good.
There we have it, podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us, and a massive thanks to Kenny and Nathan. When we recorded this, Nathan's wife, Em, was way overdue, so he literally leapt out of his seat when we were finished. So thanks, Em, for lending us Nathan. I hope we've piqued your America's Cup interest. If you want to follow the next round, the Prada Cup kicks off on the 15th of January with 4 round robins, then a repechage into a semi-final before the Challenger Series final itself. A 1-to-7 match that starts on the 13th of February. There's lots of action, and it's the America's Cup. So for sure, lots of drama. I'll let you know in social media where you can watch it. But the ambition for this Cup is to be free to view as widely as possible. So as well as your national broadcast channels, it's also available on the Cup's online channel, live on YouTube. And if we have whetted your appetite, there is still much to enjoy. In part 2, we speak to a key player from each of the Challenger teams. We chat to Terry Hutchinson from American Magic, Luna Rosa's Francesco Bruni, and podcast favourite from Ineos Team UK, Sir Ben Ainsley. All 3 of them reflecting on how things have gone to date and how the Challenger Series is shaping up. Tim's busy here in Auckland as part of the broadcast team, so an even bigger thanks than normal for finding the time to lovingly produce the pod. 3 people talking at the same time, not making his job easy. Please, as ever, let me know what you think about the podcast, or if you've any questions about Cup World, get in touch. I'm at Shirley Sale on Instagram and Twitter. Just meet on Facebook. And please do remember to like, review and subscribe on whatever platform you join us on. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming. A bit lower and faster here. Still gaining on the lay line there.
We're looking at 10-5 to 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.